Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, September 4th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, what Epstein victims are saying about investigative files in the case, plus Trump reacts to a meeting in Asia without him, and ICE detention is expanding to the notorious Angola prison. Women who say they were sexually abused by the late disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein spoke out in an emotional press conference yesterday where they called for the full release of the criminal investigative files in the case. I spoke with USA Today domestic security correspondent Josh Meyer for more. Josh, thanks for hopping on.
My pleasure, Taylor.
So Josh, what did we hear from Epstein victims yesterday?
There were a lot of victims there. There were several dozen that spoke, some of them for the first time. One was originally from Brazil, one from the United Kingdom. They all had kind of the same message, that they were groomed by Ghislaine Maxwell, allegedly, and that they were essentially served up as first initially as massage therapists or masseuses, and then as essentially sex slaves to Jeffrey Epstein. So they're very angry at Congress for not being more transparent. They're very angry at the Justice Department, and they want the files released, the so-called Epstein files. And they say that the public needs to see them and that the victims need to see them and see all the detail in them to get on with their lives.
Well, this press conference came after a big release of documents this week. Tens of thousands of documents out there, Josh. Did we learn anything new from that release? How much actually came out?
We didn't. The documents came out late in the evening, and so we had to go through, and they were done in a way where you couldn't keyword search for them, so it made it very hard to cull through them. But what we determined, and what everybody else determined, was that there was almost nothing new in there. In fact, literally nothing new. And that critics are saying, including Democrats on the Hill, are saying that congressional Republicans just released those as part of an effort to cover up for Trump, and that they're trying to withhold the full release of the documents by providing things that are already out there in order to try to claim that they're transparent when they're really not. So we're sort of in a holding pattern here.
Well, Josh, we heard that Attorney General Pam Bondi told Trump back in May that he was named multiple times in the government's files on Epstein. How is some of the news this week landing with him, with Trump? How is he reacting?
That's a good question, Taylor. He did say in recent days that it was a hoax when asked about it. And, his answers keep changing. Sometimes he says the Epstein files are a hoax. Sometimes he says there's something ginned up by the Democrats to malign him. Other times he says that there's nothing in them and that the Democrats would come out looking badly. So he's kind of all over the map here. But what is clear is that he does not want the files out. He and the administration are now leaning heavily on congressional Republicans not to release the full file. And that, of course, raises a lot of questions about why are they being so forceful in advocating against that. So right now, the two Congress people, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, that are fighting to get these documents released, they have all the Democrats and they have, I think, 4 Republicans that are voting to release them. It's through a discharge petition. It's kind of a procedural maneuver. And so they need just a couple of more Republicans to vote with them. And then the discharge petition will go to the House floor for a vote. And then the documents could be released. And apparently that's something that Trump doesn't want, because we're told that the White House is furiously maneuvering behind the scenes to get the Republicans not to agree to do that.
All right. Josh Meyer covers domestic security for USA Today. I appreciate the insight. As always, sir.
My pleasure.
President Trump said he was watching the event staged by China on the 80th anniversary of Japan's defeat in World War II and understood the reason it brought together the leaders of China, Russia, and North Korea publicly for the first time.
I thought it was very, very impressive, but I understood the reason they were doing it, and they were hoping I was watching, and I was watching.
The massive show of force showcased China's advancing military strength in front of 50,000 guests and spectators. China staged a large and highly choreographed military parade in Beijing's Tiananmen Square and unveiled a new long-range hypersonic missile, underwater drones, and even robotic wolves. Chinese leader Xi Jinping used a crowd-pleasing speech to highlight how the country's growing military and diplomatic clout represents an alternative to a U.S.-led world under Trump's White House that has strained relations with both allies and rivals. Trump complained yesterday that the U.S. was left out of the speech, saying that President Xi is a friend of his, but that he thought the U.S. should have been mentioned during the speech, quote, because we helped China, unquote. Trump addressed Xi, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and North Korea's Kim Jong-un in an earlier social media post that accused them of working to conspire against the U.S. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. The Trump administration plans to detain immigrants in the nation's largest maximum security prison, and one with a notorious history. I spoke with USA Today national immigration reporter Lauren Viagran for more. Thanks for joining me, Lauren.
Thanks for having me, Taylor.
So, getting to the latest news here, what are immigration authorities planning for this prison known as Angola?
So, what we learned yesterday from Homeland Security and ICE is that the Trump administration is planning to use the nation's largest maximum security prison, known as the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, to house or detain immigrants going forward. This is the latest that we've seen in terms of contracts between the Trump administration and Republican led states to use their prison facilities to hold migrants.
Well, what's the history behind Angola, both going back to its origins, Lauren, and even some of the ways it's made news in more recent years?
So, we have seen the Trump administration seek out sites that have a history of terrible conditions or abuse or torture among them. This is the latest iteration. So, Angola has a long and dark history, beginning in the late 1800s after the Civil War as a prison camp that was formed out of the consolidation of plantations in the Mississippi River Delta. And since then, prisoners at Angola have been made to work under the watchful eyes of armed guards. In 2023, a group of prisoners sued the Louisiana State Department of Corrections over working conditions in what's known at Angola as the quote unquote farm line. Essentially, prisoners are made to work the fields. It's a type of essentially forced labor. They were alleging that they were being forced to work in incredibly hot, dangerous conditions, and a judge ruled that the prisoners could not be made to work after the temperature rose above 88 degrees, I believe. But there continues to be problems there. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was in Louisiana on Wednesday announcing this new, essentially agreement or federal state collaboration. And I think we'll have to continue to watch how that prison is used for immigration detention going forward.
Well, as you mentioned, Lauren, this is clearly part of broader immigration efforts under this administration. How does this compare, I guess, to some of the other facilities we've seen, like Angola and other states? And why do officials argue in favor of these kinds of plans?
Well, President Donald Trump promised a mass deportation campaign, and mass deportation requires mass detention, they say. Essentially, when you make an arrest anywhere in the country, people are not delivered directly to their home countries. In some cases, they are given due process and are detained during that time. In cases where they are not afforded due process, it can take the government a long time to deport someone to their country of origin or third country that will accept them. The Trump administration is working to rapidly increase ICE detention. That includes detaining people at a sprawling camp in El Paso, Texas, on a military base. But as the administration decides how and where to build new facilities, it's striking agreements with states to hold immigrants in existing facilities, and Angola is just the latest.
Well, Lauren, we're talking about what, more than 61,000 people in immigration detention at these facilities nationwide. What's the latest you're hearing from immigration advocates and some of their concerns about, I guess, just the latest around detention?
Immigrant advocates have a number of concerns. To start, immigration detention is supposed to be, according to ICE's own guidelines, non-punitive. That means it is not supposed to be a punishment. And yet, many of the facilities that we're seeing come online, they say constitute a punishment, whether that's because of allegations of terrible or bad food, the conditions in which people are being held. Their other concern is that historically, when you hold people in ICE detention for prolonged periods, people who may have medical conditions, people who may not have any criminal record or face any criminal charges. Historically, we have seen deaths in ICE detention, and immigrant advocates fear that as the number of detained people rises, so will the number of people who lose their lives in ICE detention. Previously, the United States government had beds for 41,500 people in ICE detention on any given day. The Trump administration is looking to push that to another 80,000 beds on top of what already existed. And as you already mentioned, ICE detention is already at a record high, over 61,000 people on a recent day.
Folks can read more about Angola and the broader detention conversation with a link in today's show notes. Lauren Viagran covers the border and immigration for USA Today. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks for having me, Taylor.
A group of more than 1,000 current and former Department of Health and Human Services employees released a letter yesterday demanding Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s resignation. The letter's release comes after Kennedy's agency has faced controversy around recent actions, including funding cuts to mRNA vaccine development and a dispute that led to the White House's firing of CDC Director Susan Menarez. The letter, which is addressed to Kennedy and members of Congress, argues the secretary continues to endanger the nation's health. Barring Kennedy's resignation, the letter calls on Congress and President Trump to appoint a new HHS secretary, quote, whose qualifications and experience ensure that health policy is informed by independent and unbiased peer-reviewed science, unquote. HHS Communications Director Andrew Nixon said in a statement to USA Today that Kennedy and his team have accomplished more than any health secretary in history in the fight to end the chronic disease epidemic and make America healthy again. A federal judge ruled yesterday that the Trump administration unlawfully cut more than $2 billion in grants awarded to Harvard University and can no longer cut off research funding to the school. Harvard had become a major focus of the administration's broader campaign to leverage federal funding to force change at U.S. universities, which Trump has said see anti-Semitic and radical left ideologies. The devastating opioid epidemic that has gripped the nation in waves now has a new drug to contend with, ultra-potent nitazenes.
Anyone is potentially affected by this. And because of its significant potency, it has a very addictive nature. So anyone who thinks that they're getting another type of opiate, maybe heroin or fentanyl, they may be getting this mixed in with those other drugs.
Dr. Greg McDonald of the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine has been tracking the alarming spread of these powerful illicit drugs. He spoke with my colleague Dana Taylor on how the drugs are echoing the same devastating cycle as fentanyl. The conversation drops at 4 p.m. Eastern Time today. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.